It's been a couple of weeks since Red Bull and everything's kind of quietened down, so we're going to have a quick look at this year's Red Bull. Just a few facts and figures and a few interesting things that we noticed. Now, the first thing that we did is that, as most people know if they've watched the channel, we've actually analysed whether it's better to go first or second in Red Bull BC1. Now, previous years we've come to some interesting things. For example, 2 years ago it was actually slightly better to go first, as generally the people that went first tended to win. Now, of course, this can be a little bit biased because generally the more experienced b-boys are more likely to go first. Now, this may not necessarily tell the whole truth because generally speaking, the more experienced b-boys are more likely to go first. For example, Roxride, during his days when he was beating pretty much everyone, was known for going first, like, if he could. But, however, this year was quite interesting. In the top 16, it was an exactly 50-50 split. Bumblebee, Menno, Onel, Beetle, Bart, Kolya, Robin and Kazuki all won their battles. And as you can notice, that's actually really interesting because that's a big mixture of like experienced b-boys and new up-and-coming talent like Bumblebee, for example. Now, in the top 8, exactly the same pattern. Menno and Kazuki Rock both won by going first, and then Bart and Kolya both won by going second, which is really interesting again. Then, in the top 4, Menno and Kolya both went first and both won. So that might actually be an interesting thing. That might suggest that maybe actually going first in the top 4 when everyone's kind of running out of energy and you can set the pace of the battles and things like that might actually be the better tactic. In the B-Girls, a similar pattern emerged. Castet went first and won. However, Ayumi was the exception, who waited it out with Ami. Now, that might tell you a little bit about Ayumi and Ami because they're both similar styles of B-Girls. So maybe what Ayumi was doing was waiting to see what Ami would throw down so that she could then one-up it and take the battle. Now, the interesting thing happened in the final because Menno obviously went out first and won his battle, whereas Castet went out second and won hers. So it seems maybe that doesn't really tell us an awful lot, to be honest. Maybe in the final it doesn't matter so much which way round you go, as by that point everyone's kind of run out of moves and you're just pretty much doing whatever's left in your arsenal. So maybe actually going first or second doesn't make all that much difference. But overall, what you'll notice is that that's pretty much whether you went first or second doesn't really mean a lot. So if you went first, you won 10 times. And if you went second, you won 8 times. So that's actually really interesting because that's almost a 50-50 split, but it's just, again, slightly going first is actually the way to go. Of course, as I've discussed many times, this doesn't always tell 100% the true story. So, for example, in the first round, it was generally like the new up-and-comers who went first and won. So the guys in the first round who won were Beetle, Bart, Kolya and Robin. Now, that might also suggest that maybe if you have like a unique style, like a lot of those do, it's actually better to go first. And also, Robin is more that kind of old school thing where you get the first punch in, so that might be more about Robin's personality than anything else. But it is interesting the more experienced guys, Menno, Kazuki, went second. That's kind of interesting. It suggests that maybe first of all they waited to see what their opponent had. Now, what's interesting about Menno is that generally Menno went first and generally always won. And that's interesting because I think that tells you something about Menno. So Menno's a lot more creative, he's a lot more freestyle, and he likes to set the pace because he's got kind of a different style to the way most b-boys go. And he's kind of saying, you know, can you match this? Have you got anything to counteract this? And so I think it's really interesting that Menno actually only went second in the top 16. Otherwise, he always went first and he won all the matches, as obviously we know. Now, one of the other interesting things is the fact that Little Zoo, probably the favourite for this year, went out in the first round. Admittedly, he did go out to Killa Kolya, and as you know, Kolya is the man of the match, getting all the way to the finals, and a lot of people think he maybe edged Menno out. We discussed that a massive amount in our previous video, so we're not going to go over that ground again. But what's interesting is that actually, winning one year is usually the kiss of death for the following years. I expected it to be very rare that the b-boy that won the previous year would come back and lose the following year. However, actually, it's very common. Other b-boys that have lost in the first round include Oma, Lilu, Ronnie, and Hong Ten. Now, admittedly, their opponents were very strong. Hong Ten obviously losing to Victor, and Ronnie lost to Kolobok, of course. Now, this is quite interesting because it suggests that maybe the pressure of being the champ is actually quite tough on b-boys. So, yeah, interesting stuff going on there. Maybe it's a bit more psychology. As you know, when you can just go and no one really expects anything of you, you're completely free and you have a lot more than if everyone expects you to win and, you know, the slightest mistake and everyone's like gasping in shock. You know, that can have an effect on people. The other thing is that at the time we said that Killa Kolya was kind of up-and-comer who came out of nowhere. As you might know, Killa Kolya didn't exactly come out of nowhere. He actually got to the finals of the Last Chance Cypher last year, and unfortunately lost in the finals, but that's the way it is. Also, another fascinating fact about Killa Kolya is that he's the first b-boy to actually make it all the way from the Last Chance Cypher to the actual Red Bull BC1 final. And that's amazing. So if you think about that, he pretty much didn't get beaten in 2 straight days, except for Menno, who was the eventual champ. And I mean, if he had beaten Menno, that would have been absolutely incredible. That would have been, 10 battles without losing. Another thing that's very interesting about Killa Kolya, while we're on the subject, is that everyone remembers the meditation move that he did, which was, kind of one of the highlights, one of the things that everyone was talking about after the battle. And really interesting, that apparently came from India. So I don't know if you're particularly Zen or anything, but it's really interesting that it came round again, that the very move that he came up while messing around in India came up in the finals, and many people think should have swung battle towards him. The feedback from the Red Bull BC1 judges is out, and to be honest, it's not the most exciting. While I don't think anyone thought that the judges would just sit there like shit-talking everyone. We long for that day that judges are all like, man, that was robberies, all these guys are whack. But the responses were pretty typical, and I think that's kind of a sign that they don't want to get on bad terms with Red Bull BC1. So the first up was Physics, and Physics was actually quite nice. He said that the final battle was really close because of their different styles. He was also impressed that neither ran out of moves or stamina, of course. The only difference to Physics was the connections and flow, which, if you know about Physics, he's all about like weird connections between moves and flowing from this move to that. So it's not all that surprising that he'd pick up from that from Menno, and that was what gave Menno the edge in that battle, according to Physics. Po1 pretty much had nothing except great praise for Menno. He's a huge Menno fan, and that's not really all that surprising. If you know Po-Rock's history, he was very, very into back rocking. And so I think the kind of innovation of that style that Menno's been doing probably really appeals to guys like Po1. He also, weirdly enough, wants to name Menno's style for him, but hey, he's an OG. If you're ever wondering where I got my name from, Flow Angel, it actually comes from Kaku, who was joking around saying that I look like an angel on the dance floor because of all the lights that made me glow. If you get named by an OG, and if the OG say it, that's it. I actually had a b-boy name before that, but gone now. And so basically, apparently Menno's whole style is now going to be known as algorithm. And one thing that Poe mentions is that no matter what position he's in, Menno finds like that bubble and the filter and just keeps going. And as you know, that's one of the things we like about Menno, is that he always finds some way out of stuff. Like, we've seen him just wrap himself into all these weird positions, and he always finds something dope. The only other guy really like that is Thesis. Thesis has this amazing thing of just throwing himself into a position and then working out some way to get out of it that's dope. And it's just amazing to watch him do stuff. If you haven't already, go back and watch my footage of Thesis from this year, because just incredible stuff, like how he links stuff together and transitions from one thing to another. Yeah, otherwise, Po1 pretty much just doesn't really comment about anything, just says how much he likes Menno, and that's it. Nalumi comes in to mention that Bart versus Monkey King, which I think was a really underappreciated battle, was really close, and I really agree with her on that one. I actually slightly had Monkey King. I like all of his energy and like explosions, but I have no problem whatsoever with it going it to Bart, because I thought Bart was a bit more well-rounded than Monkey King. The other one she mentions is Little Zoo versus Killa Kolya, and yeah, let's be honest, that was more or less who was going to be in the final from that part of the group, because those two were absolutely killing it all day. No disrespect to the other b-boys. And she says those were the only two, and she actually thought the final was she pretty much knew who she was going to pick. Intact found Robin versus Flying Machine, interestingly enough, as one of the toughest battles to judge, which is actually a little bit surprising. As you know, yeah, Robin can be a pretty tough guy to like at times, but there's no denying that he's a fantastic talent. And to be honest, I thought that one was pretty clear. I mean, the crowd was really behind Flying Machine and they really wanted him to win, but I didn't think he did. But it's interesting to hear that Intact actually felt that was quite a tough one. But interestingly enough, he actually clarified later. He thought that was a really tough battle for the participants, which is really interesting. Which is probably a sign of how intense it can get. Robin is known for that really, really up-in-your-face, intense style. You either like it or you don't. We're honestly divided about it. But as he says, there was also that, plus a lot of pressure on Flying Machine, representing in front of the whole crowd. And then he also mentioned something that we mentioned about how Robin must have been feeling like he was battling not just Flying Machine, but half of India, because there was so much momentum for Machine. Then the only other interesting comment is that Intact really was feeling Castead, and I don't think you can blame him. I thought Castead was amazing. Like, I really wanted to see Ayumi win. Like, I won't lie there. But if she was going to lose to anyone, someone like Castead or even Ami is cool with me, because I'm a big fan of both of their styles. Shout out to all that, the European style, France forever, blah 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 blah. He also mentioned something that you could feel like she was getting into the zone, and he said it gave him goosebumps just to watch it. And I kind of know what he means. Like, it doesn't really come off all that great in the camera footage, but there's something about seeing those really dope B-girls really going for it, and there's a feeling, like a groove, a way they match the music. And to be honest, that sort of stuff isn't captured on the camera. So while we actually slightly edged it to Ayumi in the final, it does make me think that maybe there was some stuff that the camera didn't catch, and that maybe live it was a little bit more clearly Castead. However, it's not like it's any kind of great robbery, because those two were both amazing. Okay, so yeah, that's our update on Red Bull BC1. Honestly, as much as props to the judges, but that told us absolutely nothing that we didn't know already. I know, Red Bull BC1, you don't want to like offend the guys. I mean, probably I've made sure I'm pretty much unhireable at their group from all of the smack talking I've done for them. Don't think we're scared of you. Come on. Overall, I thought this was a pretty good one. We've had better Red Bull BC1s, and I know a lot of people are upset with the outcome because, yes, yet again, Menno won it. And it would have been really nice to hear the judges actually explain, like, blow by blow, what edged it to Menno for them and things like that. So before Christmas, we're going to try and do either a Daily Flava cast. We also have a Christmas special coming out, so watch out for that. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So Flow Angel signing out. Peace, and looking forward to another year of awesome b-boying and breaking.